Welcome back to Fear Rest. In today's episode, I'm sharing 7 true disturbing stories from the deep Appalachian wilderness. These are tales of people who ventured into forgotten hollows and ancient ridges and found something they were never meant to see. Make sure to hit that like and subscribe button and let me know where you're watching from in the comments. Story 1. The cabin sat about 40 miles southeast of Beckley, tucked into a crease in the mountain that didn't appear on any map I'd ever seen. My Uncle Darren left it to me when he passed, along with a handwritten note that said, "Don't go in winter." I remember laughing at that. I figured he meant the roads got bad or the pipes would freeze. It was late September when I finally made the drive out to see what I'd inherited, so I thought I was being smart about it. The last 12 miles were on a logging road that looked like it hadn't been maintained since the 80s. My Tacoma handled it fine, but I kept thinking about how I'd need to come back with gravel if I ever actually wanted to use the place. The trees pressed in close on both sides, mostly oak and hickory, with some pine mixed in higher up. I'd grown up in West Virginia, spent half my childhood in woods just like these, but something about the density here felt different. Oppressive, maybe. Like the forest was tolerating the road, but could reclaim it whenever it wanted. I found the cabin around 3 in the afternoon. It was smaller than I'd expected, maybe 20 feet on a side, with a covered porch that sagged in the middle and a metal roof that had gone orange with rust. A creek ran about 30 yards behind it, and I could hear it even with the truck engine running. The sound was nice at first, peaceful. The inside was dusty but intact. One main room with a wood stove, a narrow bedroom, and an outhouse about 50 feet into the trees. No electricity, no running water. Uncle Darren had left some supplies, canned goods, lamp oil, matches in a watertight container. I spent the first hour just cleaning, sweeping out mouse droppings and wiping down the table. I brought my own sleeping bag and a cooler with food for 3 days. My plan was simple: clean the place up, decide if it was worth keeping or if I should just sell the land. By the time I finished, the light was starting to fade. I got the wood stove going, more for comfort than warmth, and made myself some coffee on the camp stove I'd brought. The coffee tasted metallic, probably from the water I'd filled at a gas station 40 miles back. I sat on the porch and watched the forest darken, thinking about Uncle Darren, wondering why he'd spent so much time out here alone. That's when I noticed the trees, not all of them. Just 3 of them, maybe 60 feet out from the porch, forming a rough triangle. Someone had stripped bark from them at about chest height, leaving pale rectangles of exposed wood. I thought it was probably old surveyor marks at first, or maybe forestry tags. But when I walked closer with my flashlight, I saw something that made my stomach drop. There were words carved into each tree. Not deep. Whoever did it had used something small, maybe a pocket knife. The letters were crude but readable. The first tree said, "Stay inside after dark." The second tree said, "Do not answer if called." The third tree said, "It knows your name." I remember standing there, flashlight beam shaking a little, telling myself this was just local kids trying to scare people. Probably teenagers who knew the cabin was usually empty. But the carvings didn't look fresh. The wood had darkened with age, maybe years old. And we were 40 miles from the nearest town, 12 miles from the nearest maintained road. That was a long way to hike just to carve warnings into trees. I went back inside and locked the door. Not that the lock looked like it would stop much, it was just a basic slide bolt, and the wood around it was soft with age. I heated up some chili from a can and tried to convince myself I was overreacting. Uncle Darren had spent entire summers here. If something was actually dangerous, he wouldn't have left me the place. Around 8 o'clock, I heard the first sound. It came from the direction of the creek, a wet dragging noise, like someone pulling a heavy canvas bag through the water. I froze with my spoon halfway to my mouth. The sound continued for maybe 15 seconds, then stopped. I waited, listening so hard my ears started to ring. Then it came again, closer this time, not in the water anymore, in the leaves and undergrowth between the creek and the cabin. I turned off my lantern and moved to the window. The moon was almost full, bright enough that I could see the tree line clearly. Nothing moved, but the sound continued, a rhythmic dragging punctuated by long pauses, like whatever was making it kept stopping to listen. I told myself it was a bear or a deer with an injured leg. The Appalachians were full of wildlife, and I'd heard plenty of animals make unsettling noises at night, but this didn't sound like any animal I knew. It was too deliberate, too measured. The dragging circled the cabin. I followed it from window to window, never quite catching sight of what was making it. At one point it passed within 10 feet of the porch, close enough that I should have seen something, but there was nothing there, just the sound moving through empty space. Then it stopped. I stood in the darkness for a long time, barely breathing, waiting for it to start again. My heart was slamming against my ribs hard enough to hurt. When 15 minutes passed with nothing but silence, I started to relax. Started to think maybe it had moved on, whatever it was. That's when someone knocked on the door. 3 slow, deliberate knocks, like a neighbor stopping by to borrow something. I didn't move, didn't breathe. The knock came again, same rhythm, same force. Then a voice called out from the other side of the door. It was my Uncle Darren's voice. "Hey kiddo," it said, warm and familiar. "You gonna let me in or what?" My uncle had been dead for 3 months. I'd helped carry his casket. The voice continued. "Come on, don't be like that. It's cold out here, just open up for a minute." I backed away from the door until I hit the far wall. My mouth had gone completely dry. The voice was perfect. It had his slight West Virginia accent, the way he drew out his vowels, even the little rasp from 40 years of smoking. If I hadn't buried him myself, I would have believed it was him. "I know you're in there," the voice said. "I can hear you breathing." I clamped my hand over my mouth. Even though I knew it was too late, I'd already been making noise. The door handle started to turn, testing the lock. The bolt held, but the door rattled in its frame. Then the voice changed. It didn't change to something inhuman or monstrous. It changed to my voice. "Help," it said in my own voice. "Please, someone help me." It was exactly how I'd sound if I was terrified, every inflection perfect. I heard myself screaming, heard myself sobbing, heard myself begging someone to open the door. The performance was so accurate it made me dizzy. Then it stopped. The silence that followed was worse than the sounds. I stayed pressed against the wall, flashlight clutched in one hand, kitchen knife for my supplies in the other. Hours crawled by. My legs started to ache from standing, but I was afraid to move, afraid any sound would bring it back. Around midnight, I heard footsteps on the porch, not the dragging sound from before. These were normal footsteps, like a person walking. They moved back and forth, a slow pacing, occasionally stopping as if to peer through the windows. I'd covered the windows with my jacket and a towel, anything I could find, so I couldn't see out, and whatever was out they couldn't see in. The pacing continued until the sky started to lighten. The footsteps stopped sometime around 5:30, right around dawn. I waited another hour before I risked looking outside. The porch was empty. The forest looked normal in the early morning light, almost beautiful. I noticed birds singing, which I hadn't heard at all during the night. I packed my truck in about 10 minutes, throwing everything in the bed without bothering to organize it. I didn't care about the supplies I was leaving behind. I didn't care about the cabin or the property or anything except getting back to pavement and people. I was halfway down the logging road when I realized I should probably check the porch, make sure I'd actually locked up. I told myself I was being paranoid, but I pulled over and walked back anyway. That's when I found it. In the dirt at the bottom of the porch steps, someone had drawn a symbol. It looked like it had been made with a stick or a finger, a circle with lines radiating out from the center, and something that might have been letters I didn't recognize around the circumference. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was the handprint pressed into the dirt next to it. It was huge, easily twice the size of my own hand, with fingers that were too long and too thin. I stood there staring at it, my brain trying to make it make sense and failing completely. I got back in my truck and didn't stop driving until I hit Beckley. I never went back to the cabin. I sold the property 8 months later to a developer from Ohio, didn't even negotiate on the price. I just wanted it gone. Part of the sales contract required me to disclose any known issues with the property, and I remember staring at that section for a long time, pen in hand. Finally, I just checked no and signed it. Sometimes I wonder if the new owner ever found those words carved into the trees. I wonder if they stayed inside after dark. I wonder if it knew their name too. Story 2. My best friend Sienna and I decided to hike the Gallows Ridge Trail on a Tuesday in October, which should have been our first clue we weren't thinking straight. Gallows Ridge wasn't exactly secret. It was marked on the official park map, but nobody went there. The trailhead was down a fire access road that hadn't been graded in years, and the trail itself had a reputation for being poorly maintained. But Sienna had just bought a new camera and wanted to photograph full colors, and I was between jobs with nothing but time, so we figured why not. The drive out took longer than we expected. We left Asheville around 8 and didn't reach the trailhead until almost noon. The parking area was just a widening in the fire road, barely enough room for 2 cars. Ours was the only vehicle. The trail started out pleasant enough. The leaves were perfect, deep reds and oranges with some yellow birch mixed in. Sienna stopped every 50 feet to take pictures, which was fine by me. I wasn't in any hurry. We brought sandwiches and water for a day hike, planning to make it to the ridge overlook and back before dark. Around mile 3 we found the first one. It was hanging from a low branch maybe 10 feet off the trail. At first I thought it was just debris, maybe an old plastic bag caught in the tree. But when we got closer, I realized it was a doll. One of those old-fashioned porcelain dolls with a cracked face and stained dress. Someone had hung it by its neck with fishing line. "That's weird," Sienna said, which felt like an understatement. We kept walking. Half a mile later we found another one, then another. 5 dolls total, all hanging at roughly the same height, all spaced along the trail like markers. None of them looked new. The elements had gotten to them, rain stains, faded clothes, some missing limbs. "Should we turn back?" I asked. Sienna was already photographing the last doll, adjusting her settings to get the light right. "It's probably just some art installation," she said. "You know how hikers are, they get bored and make weird stuff." I wasn't convinced, but I also didn't want to be the one to chicken out. We'd already come 3.5 miles. The overlook was supposed to be just another mile ahead. The trail got steeper. We were both breathing hard, not talking much, just focusing on the climb. The trees started to thin out as we gained elevation, and I could see glimpses of the valley below through the gaps. It really was beautiful. I started to relax, started to think the dolls were just some harmless weirdness we'd laugh about later. We reached the overlook around 2:30. It was a granite outcropping that jutted out from the ridge, giving us a view that stretched for miles. Sienna immediately started taking photos while I sat down and pulled out our sandwiches. That's when I noticed the can. It was off to the side of the overlook, maybe 20 feet back from the edge. Someone had stacked rocks into a pyramid about 4 feet tall, and they'd arranged other objects around the base. I walked over to get a closer look and immediately wished I hadn't. The objects were bones, small ones mostly. I recognized what looked like bird skulls, rodent jaws, maybe a fox or coyote skull. They'd been arranged in a circle around the cairn, each one placed deliberately like an offering. "Sienna," I called, "you should see this." She came over and went quiet. I watched her face change as she processed what she was seeing. "Okay," she said slowly, that's not normal." "We should go," I said. Yeah, let's go." We packed up quickly, neither of us talking about what we'd seen, both of us just wanting to get back to the car. The hike down should have been faster, but the light was already starting to fade. We'd spent longer at the overlook than I'd realized. We were maybe 2 miles from the trailhead when Sienna grabbed my arm. "Did you hear that?" she whispered. I stopped walking. At first I didn't hear anything unusual, just wind in the trees and our own breathing. Then I caught it, a voice, distant and faint, calling from somewhere off the trail. It sounded like a child. "Help," the voice called. "Please help me." My first instinct was to call back to ask where they were, but something stopped me. Maybe it was the dolls we'd seen, maybe it was the bone circle, or maybe it was just the fact that the voice didn't sound quite right. It was too clear, too projected, like someone performing rather than actually in distress. "We should check," Sienna said, but she didn't sound certain. The voice came again. "I'm hurt, please." It was coming from downslope, off to our left. The forest was thick there, no trail, just dense undergrowth and fallen logs. I thought about a kid wandering off trail and getting lost, getting injured, needing help. But I also thought about how far we were from anywhere, how unlikely it was that a child would be out here alone. "Hello," Sienna called out. "Where are you?" The voice didn't answer. Instead, we heard movement in the undergrowth, something pushing through the brush toward us. It sounded bigger than a child. "Run," I said. We didn't discuss it, didn't debate it. We just ran. The trail was steep and we were going downhill too fast, my ankles screaming every time my feet hit the ground at an angle. Behind us, I could hear whatever was crashing through the forest, keeping pace. It stayed off the trail, paralleling us maybe 30 or 40 feet into the trees. I caught glimpses of movement through the undergrowth, but never got a clear look at what it was. At one point, Sienna stumbled and I grabbed her arm, yanking her back upright without breaking stride. The voice started calling again, but it had changed. It wasn't a child anymore. It was my voice screaming Sienna's name in terror. Then it was Sienna's voice screaming mine. The two voices overlapped and echoed through the trees, creating this horrible chorus of our own fear. We passed the hanging dolls going way too fast to count them. My lungs were burning and my legs felt like they were going to give out, but I didn't slow down. Neither did Sienna. The thing in the forest kept pace the entire time, never getting closer, never falling back, just maintaining that constant distance. We saw the parking area, and both of us found speed we didn't know we had left. I had my keys out before we reached the car, hands shaking so badly I almost dropped them. Sienna dove into the passenger seat, and I gunned the engine, spraying gravel as we fishtailed onto the fire road. I didn't slow down until we hit pavement 15 minutes later. We didn't talk about it that night. Sienna dropped me at my apartment and drove home, and we didn't speak for 3 days. When we finally did talk, neither of us wanted to discuss what happened. We just agreed we'd misheard something, maybe a real hiker in distress, and we'd panicked. But I know what I heard, and I know what I saw moving through those trees. Last month, Sienna told me she'd gone through her photos from that day. She'd deleted most of them, but she kept one. It was a shot of the overlook, the valley stretching out in the background. She'd taken it while I was looking at the can, and she hadn't noticed what was in the frame until weeks later. There's something standing in the tree line behind where I was standing. It's mostly hidden by shadows and branches, but you can make out a pale shape, tall and thin, with limbs that don't quite look right. And if you zoom in on where its face should be, you can see it's watching the camera. She sent me the file and I looked at it once. Then I deleted it and blocked her number when she tried to send it again. I don't want to see what was watching us that day. Story 3. I got hired to do a wildlife survey in Carter Hollow the summer I turned 31. The state forestry department needed someone to count deer populations and look for invasive species, pretty standard stuff. The money was decent and the contract was only for 2 weeks, so I took it even though I'd never heard of Carter Hollow before. I should have asked why they were having trouble finding someone to do the work. The hollow was in eastern Kentucky, tucked into a valley so narrow you could stand on one ridge and throw a rock to the other side. The state owned all the land now, but there'd been a small community there in the 30s and 40s before everyone moved away. The ranger who briefed me, a guy named Keith Roswell, mentioned this like it was barely worth noting. Just old homesteads, he said. Couple of chimneys still standing, some foundation stones, nothing you need to worry about. I asked why everyone left. Economics, he said. Coal dried up, people followed work elsewhere. Same story all over Appalachia. He didn't make eye contact when he said it, and I remember thinking that was odd, but I didn't push it. I'd worked survey contracts before, and rangers always got weird about old settlements. I think they felt bad about what happened to those communities. I set up my base camp at the north end of the hollow, near a creek that ran clear enough to filter for drinking water. The first few days went fine. I'd hike out at dawn with my GPS and camera, mark deer signs, check for hemlock woolly adelgid, take soil samples, standard stuff. I'd see the ruins sometimes, collapsed cabins, a rusted car chassis from the 50s, a cemetery with headstones so weathered you couldn't read the names. It was sad more than creepy. On the 4th night, I heard singing. It woke me up around 2 in the morning, a woman's voice carrying down the hollow. The melody was pretty, something old-timey and gospel-sounding, but I couldn't make out the words. My first thought was that another surveyor or maybe a backpacker had camped nearby, even though Keith said I'd be alone in the hollow. The singing continued for maybe 5 minutes, then stopped. I waited to see if it would start again, but the night stayed quiet. Eventually, I convinced myself I'd been half asleep and dreaming, and I drifted back off. The next morning, I hiked up to the South Ridge to check a section I hadn't surveyed yet. That's where I found the church. It was the only building still mostly intact in the entire hollow. Small, maybe room for 30 people at most, with white paint peeling off the clapboard siding and a steeple that listed hard to the left. The door was closed but not locked. I probably shouldn't have gone inside, but I was curious about what kind of condition the interior was in. The pews were still there, arranged in neat rows facing a simple wooden pulpit. Someone had left a Bible open on the pulpit, and when I got close enough to read it, I saw the pages were swollen with moisture and covered in black mold. But what got my attention was the organ. It sat against the back wall, an old pump organ with yellowed keys and a cracked bench. And on the music stand, there was sheet music, not moldy or deteriorated, fresh. The paper was white, the ink was dark, and when I touched it, the pages were crisp. Someone had placed it there recently, very recently. I left the church faster than I'd entered. That night the singing came again, but this time I was fully awake when it started, and I knew I wasn't dreaming. It was the same woman's voice, the same old gospel melody, and it was coming from the direction of the church, about 1.5 miles from my camp. I didn't go investigate. I sat in my tent with my headlamp off and my knife in my hand, listening to that voice echo down the hollow until it finally stopped. The singing came every night after that, always around 2 in the morning, always the same melody, and each night it seemed a little closer, like whoever was singing was walking toward my camp while they sang. On the 8th night, I decided I'd had enough. I packed up my gear right after sunset, planning to hike out to my truck and spend the rest of the night in town. The contract could wait. I'd come back during the day to finish the survey, but I wasn't spending another night alone in that hollow. I was halfway to the trailhead when I saw the lights. They were moving through the trees ahead of me, maybe a dozen of them, lanterns or flashlights bobbing in the darkness. I froze, trying to figure out who else would be out here. Poachers, maybe, or kids from one of the nearby towns looking for a place to party. Then I heard the singing. It wasn't one voice anymore. It was many voices, all singing the same melody in harmony, and the lights were coming from the direction of the church, moving in a procession down into the hollow. I stepped off the trail and crouched behind a laurel thicket, watching the lights approach. They passed within 50 feet of where I was hiding, close enough that I should have been able to see who was carrying them, but there was nobody there. Lanterns floated through the air at chest height, moving in a steady line like a congregation walking to service. The singing came from all around them, dozens of voices filling the night, but I couldn't see a single person. Just the lights and the voices and the sound of footsteps on the trail, footsteps I could hear but couldn't see making them. I don't know how long I stayed hidden. Long enough for my legs to go numb. Long enough for the procession to pass and continue down toward the heart of the hollow. When the last light disappeared and the singing finally faded, I ran. I made it to my truck in under an hour, faster than I've ever hiked that trail before or since. I called Keith from the parking area, told him I was done with the contract and wouldn't be coming back. "Did you see them?" he asked quietly. I didn't answer. "The families that lived there," he said. "The ones who left in the 40s. Some of them didn't leave. There was a flood in 42, washed out most of the hollow. A lot of people drowned. They buried the bodies in a mass grave behind the church because the cemetery was underwater." "Why didn't you tell me that before I went in?" I asked. He was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "Because nobody ever sees anything the first week. If you'd made it 2 weeks without incident, I figured you'd be fine. Most surveyors do." "And the ones who don't?" I asked. He hung up. "I never finished that contract. The state sent me a check for the work I'd completed, and I cashed it without calling them back. About 6 months later, I heard they'd hired someone else to finish the survey, a guy from Virginia who didn't know the history. He made it 11 days before he quit. I don't know what he saw. I kept the sheet music from the church. I don't know why. It's in a box in my closet, and sometimes late at night, I think I can hear singing coming from that box. Just faint, just barely there, like someone far away calling me back. I'll never open it, and I'll never go back to Carter Hollow." Story 4. My brother Vaughn talked me into hunting at Black Bend Gorge the November after I graduated college. I'd hunted deer plenty of times growing up in Tennessee, but never at Black Bend. Everyone in our county knew about Black Bend. It was this huge tract of state game lands, thousands of acres of untouched forest, but nobody really went there. The terrain was too rough, the access was terrible, and the success rate was supposedly awful despite all the land. But Vaughn had gotten it in his head that the reason nobody had success was because nobody was willing to hike far enough in. "All the deer are pushed to the interior," he said. "Away from the pressure. We go deep enough, we'll have our pick." I should have said no. I had a job interview the following week, and I needed to prepare. But Vaughn had that way of making you feel like a coward if you didn't go along with his plans, so I agreed. We parked at the northern access point around 4 in the morning on opening day. The plan was to hike in 3 miles, set up in a good spot before sunrise, and wait for deer to move through. We'd packed light, just our rifles, some water, granola bars, basic supplies. The hike was harder than Vaughn had made it sound. The trail was barely maintained, more of a game path than anything official, and we were navigating by headlamp through dense undergrowth. We found a ridge around 5:30 and set up about 40 yards apart, both of us with good sightlines down into a hollow where deer might be moving. The sun came up slow and cold, burning off the mist that had settled in the low areas. It was beautiful in that way early winter mornings can be, everything frosted and still. We didn't see a single deer all morning. Around 11, Vaughn came over to where I was sitting. "This is bullshit," he said. "I haven't seen anything. Not even squirrels." Now that he mentioned it, I realized he was right. The forest was weirdly quiet. No birds, no rustling in the undergrowth, nothing. Just silence and the occasional whisper of wind through bare branches. "Let's push deeper," Vaughn said. "Another mile or so. There's got to be deer somewhere." We hiked further into the gorge, leaving the trail entirely now and just following the terrain. The hollow got narrower and the ridges got steeper. At one point we had to scramble down a rock face, lowering our rifles ahead of us on a rope Vaughn had thought to pack. We found the clearing around noon. It was maybe 30 feet across, perfectly circular, like someone had come through and cleared all the vegetation right down to bare dirt. But that wasn't the weird part. The weird part was the trees around the perimeter. Someone had carved symbols into every single tree facing the clearing. Not recent carvings, the bark had grown back over them in places, making them hard to see unless you were looking for them. But once you noticed one, you noticed them all. Dozens of symbols, none of them repeating, none of them making any sense. They looked almost like letters, but from no alphabet I recognized. "What the hell is this?" Vaughn said. I didn't have an answer. We stood at the edge of the clearing, both of us instinctively not wanting to step inside it. Something about the space felt wrong, like the air was different there, heavier somehow. That's when we heard the screaming. It came from deeper in the gorge, down where the hollow narrowed to almost nothing. A man's voice screaming in absolute terror, wordless and raw. It went on for maybe 10 seconds, then cut off abruptly. Vaughn and I looked at each other. "Someone's hurt," he said. "Maybe," I said, but I didn't believe it. The scream hadn't sounded like pain. It had sounded like fear. "We have to check," Vaughn said. Every instinct I had was screaming at me to go the other direction, to get out of the gorge and back to the truck. But Vaughn was already moving toward where the sound had come from, and I couldn't let him go alone. We found the camp about 200 yards from the clearing. It was recent, a tent still standing, a fire ring with warm ashes, a backpack propped against a tree, but whoever had been there was gone. The tent flap was open and the sleeping bag inside was shredded, torn to pieces like an animal had gotten to it. Long claw marks had gouged through the nylon. "Jesus," Vaughn whispered. There was blood on the sleeping bag, not a lot, but enough. And there were drag marks leading away from the tent, going further down the hollow where the ground dropped away into darkness. "We need to call someone," I said. "Game warden, police, someone." Vaughn pulled out his phone. No signal. We were too deep in the gorge, too much terrain between us and any cell tower. We'd have to hike out to call for help. We were turning to leave when we heard it. Breathing. Heavy and wet, coming from the direction of the drag marks. Not human breathing. Too deep, too slow, too much rattle in it. We both froze, rifles coming up instinctively. Something moved in the shadows at the bottom of the hollow. I couldn't make out details, the undergrowth was too thick, the light was too poor. But I could see it was big, bigger than a bear, and it was moving toward us with a strange hitching gait, like it was injured or built wrong. "Back away," I whispered. We started retreating, keeping our rifles aimed at whatever was down there. It kept coming, pushing through the laurel, branches snapping under its weight. I caught a glimpse of something pale, something that might have been a hand but with too many fingers, reaching out to grab a tree trunk. Then Vaughn tripped. He went down hard, his rifle clattering against a rock. The thing in the hollow stopped moving. The breathing stopped too. Everything went absolutely silent. I reached down to help Vaughn up, never taking my eyes off the shadows. That's when it charged. I didn't get a good look at it even then. My brain couldn't seem to process what I was seeing, just an impression of something wrong, something that moved like it had too many joints, something with a face that was trying to be human and failing. I fired my rifle without aiming, the crack of the shot echoing off the gorge walls. The thing screamed, not like the man had screamed earlier. This was different, higher pitched and somehow wet, like its throat was full of fluid. But it stopped charging. It pulled back into the shadows, and I heard it crashing away through the undergrowth, moving fast. I hauled Vaughn to his feet and we ran. I don't remember much of the hike out. I remember falling at least twice. I remember my lungs burning and my legs cramping and Vaughn ahead of me, moving faster than I'd ever seen him move. I remember looking back once and seeing something pale moving through the trees behind us, keeping pace but not quite catching up, like it was herding us rather than chasing us. We hit the parking area around 3 in the afternoon. We were both bleeding from scratches, both gasping so hard we couldn't talk. Vaughn's phone had signal again, and he called 911, tried to explain what we'd found. The police and game wardens went in the next morning. They found the camp. They found the shredded tent and the blood and the drag marks, but they didn't find a body. They didn't find anything else either. No tracks they could identify, no evidence of what had been there. They asked us a lot of questions, asked if we'd been drinking, if we'd brought anything into the woods we shouldn't have. Eventually they seemed to accept that we'd seen something, even if they didn't believe our description of it. The camp belonged to a hiker from North Carolina named Marcus Webb. He'd been reported missing by his girlfriend 3 days before we found his site. They never found him. They also never found whatever was living in that gorge. Vaughn and I don't hunt together anymore. We don't really talk much at all. But last month he called me out of nowhere, said he needed to tell me something. He'd gone back to Blackbine, he said, not into the gorge, just to the parking area. He wanted to prove to himself it was just a place, just normal woods. He found something scratched into the side of his truck. Something he swears wasn't there when we left that day 3 years ago. He wouldn't tell me what it said. Story 5. I inherited my grandmother's house in the mountains outside Boone when I was 28. I'd visited the place maybe 5 times as a kid, always in summer when the weather was nice and the property felt manageable. My grandmother had lived there alone for 40 years after my grandfather died, and she'd always been particular about certain things. She had rules. Don't go into the root cellar after dark. Don't leave shoes on the porch overnight. Keep salt in every windowsill. As a kid, I'd thought it was just superstition, old mountain beliefs that didn't mean anything. After she died, I thought about selling the place immediately. But the housing market was terrible, and I was between leases on my apartment in Charlotte, so I decided to spend a few months fixing it up before I listed it, make it more appealing to buyers. I moved in on a Thursday in March, when the weather was still cold and the trees were just starting to bud. The house was bigger than I remembered. 2 stories, wraparound porch, sitting on about 15 acres of wooded land, with a creek running through the back of the property. The nearest neighbor was 3 miles down a dirt road. The isolation was part of the appeal, I figured. People paid good money for privacy these days. I spent the first week just cleaning. My grandmother had been a pack rat, and every room was full of boxes, newspapers, jars of preserved food that were decades old. I found her collection of folk remedy books, her journals, her annotated Bible. In the back of her bedroom closet, I found a metal box with no lock. Inside were newspaper clippings. They were old, from the 60s and 70s, mostly all from local papers. The headlines were variations on the same theme: hiker missing in Pisgah Forest, search continues for lost hunter, woman vanishes during camping trip. There were dozens of them, all carefully cut out and organized by date. On the back of each one, my grandmother had written notes in her cramped handwriting. Notes like "too close" and "moved 3 miles west" and "quiet for 2 months." I didn't know what to make of it. My grandmother had never mentioned being interested in missing persons cases, but here was evidence of decades of tracking them, organizing them, studying them. At the bottom of the box was a map. It was hand-drawn, showing the area around the house and the surrounding forest. She'd marked locations with red X's and dates. Some of the dates were from the newspaper clippings. Others were older, going back to the 40s. All of the X's formed a rough circle around the property. I'll admit that gave me a chill, but I told myself it was just an old woman's obsession, nothing more. Maybe she'd been fascinated by local mysteries. Maybe it was just a hobby that got out of hand. I went back to cleaning and tried not to think about it. The first night I heard the tapping, I assumed it was branches against the house. Wind had picked up around midnight and the old trees around the property were moving. But the tapping was rhythmic. 3 taps, pause, 3 taps, pause. It moved around the house, starting at the kitchen window, then moving to the living room, then upstairs to what had been my grandmother's bedroom. I got up to check, turning on lights as I went. There was nothing outside any of the windows. No branches close enough to touch the glass. The tapping stopped when I got close, then started again somewhere else in the house. This continued for maybe an hour before it finally stopped. I went back to bed but didn't sleep much. The next night it happened again. Same pattern, same rhythm. 3 taps, pause, move to another window. I tried to catch it, moving through the house quickly to see if I could spot what was making the sound. At one point I went outside with a flashlight, walking the perimeter of the house. I found the footprints in the flower bed beneath the kitchen window. They were bare footprints, human-shaped but wrong. The toes were too long, the heel too narrow, and they were deep, pressed into the soil like whatever made them was much heavier than a person should be. I followed the prints around the house. They circled the entire building, stopping at each window, then led away into the woods. I went back inside, locked every door and window, and pushed my grandmother's old dresser in front of the bedroom door. The tapping came again around midnight, but this time when it reached the bedroom window, it didn't stop. It kept going, getting louder, more insistent. The glass rattled in its frame. I could see the window flexing inward with each impact, like something was slamming its palm against it. Then I heard my grandmother's voice. "Let me in, darling," she said, perfect and clear. I forgot my key. I didn't move, didn't breathe. My grandmother had been dead for 6 months. "I know you can hear me," the voice continued. "Don't be rude, open the window." The tapping got harder, faster. The glass cracked, a single line splitting from corner to corner. I grabbed my phone and called 911, whispering my location and saying someone was trying to break in. The operator kept me on the line, said police were on their way, asked me to stay calm. I could hear sirens in the distance, getting closer. The tapping stopped. When the police arrived 15 minutes later, they found the footprints. They searched the woods with flashlights and dogs, but didn't find anyone. They took pictures of the cracked window and the prints, made a report, told me to call if anything else happened. I packed a bag and drove to a motel in Boone. I went back the next day in full sunlight, with 2 friends I'd called to help me collect some of my grandmother's things. The house looked normal in daylight, almost welcoming, but when we went inside, we found something that made my blood go cold. Every single jar of salt my grandmother had kept in the windowsills had been knocked to the floor. The windows were all still closed and locked, but the salt was scattered everywhere, like someone had swept through the house and deliberately removed it. On the kitchen table, someone had arranged objects from around the house into a pattern. A hairbrush, 3 candles, a picture frame, a kitchen knife. They formed a circle with a gap on the side facing the back door. My friend Jade took one look and said, "We should leave." We didn't argue. I hired a real estate agent from Asheville and listed the property as is. I took a significant loss on the price just to get it sold quickly. The buyer was a developer who planned to tear down the house and build a vacation rental. I got a call from the developer about 3 weeks later. He said his construction crew had refused to continue working on the property. They'd torn down most of the house, but when they started excavating for the new foundation, they found something. Bones, dozens of them, buried in a circle around where the house had stood. Human bones, some of them very old. The police were investigating, he said. Did I know anything about it? I didn't, but I thought about my grandmother's map, about all those red X's forming a circle around the property. About the newspaper clippings and the dates and her careful notes. I thought about what she might have been keeping contained. The construction project was abandoned. The land is still there, still for sale, listed at a fraction of what I sold it for. I check the listing sometimes, morbidly curious if anyone will ever buy it. So far nobody has. Last month I got a letter in the mail. No return address, postmarked from Boone. Inside was a single newspaper clipping, recent, about a hiker who'd gone missing in the Pisgah forest. And on the back, in handwriting that looked exactly like my grandmother, someone had written, "It's moving again." Story 6. The job posting said forestry surveyor, remote location, $3,000 week. That was double what I usually made doing survey work, so I applied without reading the details too carefully. I should have been more suspicious of why they were paying so much. The company was called Ridgeline Forest Management, and when I showed up for the interview, it was just me and a tired-looking man named Gerald Pruitt in a prefab office outside Elkins. "The site is difficult to access," he explained. "And the previous surveyor left before completing the work." "Why did they leave?" I asked. He looked uncomfortable. Personal reasons, but the work itself is straightforward. We need baseline data on tree density, species composition, soil conditions. 2 weeks, all equipment provided, lodging on site. The lodging turned out to be a camper trailer, parked in a clearing about 6 miles from the nearest road. Gerald drove me in on a four-wheeler, the equipment and supplies strapped to a trailer behind us. The ride took almost an hour, bouncing over terrain that barely qualified as a trail. The trailer was old but functional. Generator, propane heat, a bed, a tiny bathroom, solar panels on the roof. There was a work table inside with maps and a laptop for logging data. Gerald showed me everything, reminded me how to use the satellite phone if I had problems, and left. I spent the first 3 days doing the actual survey work. It was tedious but not difficult. Mark GPS coordinates, identify trees, collect soil samples, photograph everything. The forest was dense second growth, mostly poplar and oak, with some hemlock in the wetter areas. I didn't see much wildlife. A few squirrels, some crows, but nothing unusual. On the 4th night, I found the message in the trailer. I'd been looking for batteries in one of the storage cabinets when I found a notebook shoved in the back. It wasn't part of the supplied materials. The cover was water-stained and the pages were warped. Inside, someone had written notes in pencil. The handwriting was messy, like it had been done in a hurry. Most of it was survey data, similar to what I was collecting, but toward the end, the notes changed. Something moving in the forest at night. Can hear it circling the trailer. Checked perimeter, no tracks, nothing on camera. It knows I'm here. Don't go to the stone foundation. That last line was underlined 3 times, the pencil pressed so hard it had torn the paper. I sat in the trailer for a long time holding that notebook. The logical part of my brain said this was just the previous surveyor psyching themselves out, letting isolation get to them. People did that sometimes on remote jobs, but the message was specific. Don't go to the stone foundation. I pulled out the maps Gerald had given me. There was no stone foundation marked anywhere. But when I looked at my GPS tracks from the past 3 days, I realized I'd been working in a pattern that avoided the western section of the property. Not intentionally. The terrain just naturally led me in other directions. The next morning, I headed west. I found the foundation about 2 miles from the trailer, tucked into a hollow I hadn't explored yet. It was old, probably 19th century, just 4 walls of stacked stone about 3 feet high marking where a cabin had once stood. Trees grew inside it now, their roots breaking apart the stonework. It looked completely unremarkable, except for the smell. There was something wrong about the air near the foundation. It smelled like meat that had started to turn sweet and rotten at the same time. I couldn't see any dead animals, no obvious source. Just that smell, strong enough to make my eyes water. I took some pictures, marked the location on my GPS, and left. I told myself I'd mention it in my report, suggest they check for environmental contamination. But I didn't feel right. My skin was crawling and I had this overwhelming urge to get away from that hollow. That night I heard it for the first time. Footsteps circling the trailer, slow and deliberate, crunching through the leaves and undergrowth. They'd pause occasionally, like whoever was walking was stopping to listen. I looked out the window with my flashlight but couldn't see anything. The footsteps continued for hours. I called out once, asked if anyone was there, but got no response. Eventually, exhausted, I fell asleep in the chair with my flashlight in my hand. In the morning, I found the circle. Someone had walked a perfect ring around the trailer, maybe 20 feet out. I could see the disturbed leaves and compressed soil clearly in the daylight, but there were no footprints, no identifiable tracks. Just the evidence that something had walked in a circle around my shelter all night. I should have called Gerald and demanded to be extracted. But I only had 4 days left on the contract, and I needed the money. I told myself I'd finish the work, stay inside after dark, and leave as soon as the 2 weeks were up. The next 3 nights were the same, footsteps circling, that sense of being watched, nothing visible when I looked outside. The circle around the trailer got tighter each night. By the 6th night, whatever was walking was close enough that I could hear its breathing, deep and wet, like fluid in the lungs. On the 7th night, it knocked on the door. 3 deliberate knocks, exactly like a person would knock. I was sitting at the work table trying to focus on logging data, and those 3 knocks made me drop my pen. I didn't answer. The knock came again, then a voice, muffled but clear. I know you found it." The voice was wrong. Too deep with an odd resonance, like it was coming from inside a barrel. I looked at the door and saw the handle start to turn. Slowly, testing to see if it was locked. It was. I'd made sure to lock it. The handle stopped moving. The breathing outside got louder faster, like whatever was there was getting excited. Then it moved to the window and I heard scratching on the glass. Not fingernails, something harder, like bone or wood. I grabbed the satellite phone and called the emergency number Gerald had given me. It rang 8 times before he answered, his voice thick with sleep. "There's something outside the trailer," I said. "I need extraction now." "Are you injured?" he asked. "No, but..." "Then I'll come at first light. It's too dangerous to drive the trail at night." The scratching got louder. The window rattled in its frame. "It's trying to get in," I said. Gerald was quiet for a long moment. "Did you go to the stone foundation?" My blood went cold. "How did you know?" "Stay inside," he said. "Don't open the door no matter what you hear. I'll be there at dawn." Nup. The thing outside the trailer went silent. No breathing, no scratching, nothing. I sat in that silence for maybe 30 seconds, hoping it had left. Then every window in the trailer shook at once, like something had struck them all simultaneously. The lights flickered. The whole trailer rocked on its frame. I grabbed a knife from the kitchen drawer and wedged myself into the bathroom, the smallest, most interior space in the trailer. I could hear it outside, moving around the walls, testing them. At one point, something scraped across the roof, metal on metal, slow and deliberate. Around 4 in the morning, it stopped. I stayed in the bathroom until I heard Gerald's four-wheeler approaching around 6. When I came out, every window was cracked, thin lines spreading across the glass like spider webs. And on the door, someone had scratched deep gouges into the metal, 4 parallel lines dragged down from top to bottom. Gerald took one look and didn't ask questions. We loaded essential equipment and I left everything else. I didn't care, I just wanted out of there. On the drive back, I asked him what was at the foundation. "Something died there," he said. "Long time ago, probably an animal, maybe not. The forest does strange things around old death." "The previous surveyor," I said. "What really happened to them?" He didn't answer for a long time. Then, barely audible over the engine, we found their trailer empty. All their equipment still there, food half-eaten on the table, no sign of struggle. We searched for 3 days. "Did you find them?" "No. I finished the contract from home, working off the data I'd already collected. The company paid me the full amount and sent a bonus, plus a form to sign agreeing I wouldn't discuss the site or my experience there. I signed it. But I kept the notebook I'd found, and sometimes, late at night, I read the last entry the previous surveyor wrote. It's not an animal. It's something that remembers being human and hates us for still being what it's not. I don't know what that means. I don't want to know." Story 7. My wife Helen and I bought the cabin on Fletcher Mountain because we wanted a quiet place to escape to on weekends. We were both teachers in Knoxville, and the noise and stress were wearing us down. The cabin wasn't much, 1 bedroom, a loft, a tiny kitchen, but it sat on 3 acres of wooded land with a view of the valley that made the whole thing worthwhile. The previous owners had maintained it well, and the price was reasonable. We closed in April and spent our first weekend there in May, when the wildflowers were blooming and the weather was perfect. The first weekend was everything we'd hoped for. We hiked, read on the porch, cooked simple meals. Sunday night before we left, we met our only neighbor, a woman in her 70s named Constance Walsh, who lived about half a mile down the mountain. She walked up to introduce herself, bringing a jar of apple butter she'd made. "Beautiful place you've got," she said, looking around at the cabin and the trees. "The Hendersons took good care of it." "Did you know them well?" Helen asked. "Well enough," Constance said. "Nice couple, kept to themselves mostly." She paused, like she wanted to say something else, then smiled. "You'll love it here, very peaceful." As she was leaving, she turned back. "One thing, you might hear coyotes at night. They can sound awful, almost like people screaming. Don't let it spook you." We thanked her and she headed back down the trail to her place. We started coming up every other weekend after that. The routine was always the same: arrive Friday evening, leave Sunday afternoon. We'd hike the trails around the property, work on small improvement projects, just decompress from the week. It was exactly what we needed. In June, Helen found the photographs. They were in a box in the loft, tucked behind some old insulation. The box wasn't hidden exactly, just forgotten. Inside were maybe 30 Polaroids, all of the same thing. The woods at night, taken from what looked like the cabin's back porch. Each photo showed trees illuminated by a camera flash, and in each one there was a figure. It was always in the background, partially hidden by trees or shadow. You could make out a pale shape, humanoid but not quite right. In some of the photos it was further away, in others it was closer. Someone had written dates on the back of each Polaroid. They spanned about 8 months, ending in March, right before the Hendersons sold the cabin. "What is this?" Helen asked. "I didn't know." We looked through all the photos carefully. The figure never looked the same twice, but there was a consistency to it, pale, tall, always standing just at the edge of the flash's range. And in every single photo, it seemed to be facing the camera. "Should we ask Constance?" Helen suggested. I thought about it but decided against it. "It's probably just someone messing around. Kids from town playing tricks." But I didn't believe that. The mountain was too remote, the cabin too isolated, and the Hendersons had clearly been documenting something, taking regular photos like they were trying to prove it was real. That night, I couldn't sleep. Around 2 in the morning, I got up and looked out the back window, half expecting to see something standing in the trees. There was nothing, just darkness and the vague shapes of the forest. But I kept thinking about those photos, about the dates, about how the figure had gotten progressively closer in the later images. The next weekend, we brought a better flashlight and a camera. I told Helen I wanted to check the back of the property, make sure everything was secure. Really, I wanted to see if there was anything out there, any sign of what the Hendersons had been photographing. We didn't find anything unusual. No tracks, no campfire remains, no evidence anyone had been in the woods around the cabin. But that night around midnight, we heard something. It started as clicking sounds, like someone knocking 2 stones together. Rhythmic, deliberate. Click, 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 pause, click, click, click. It came from the woods behind the cabin, maybe 50 yards out. Helen grabbed my arm. "What is that?" I didn't answer. I was already moving toward the back door, flashlight in hand. Helen tried to stop me, said we should just ignore it, but I needed to know. I stepped out onto the porch and swept the flashlight across the tree line. Nothing. The clicking stopped. I kept the light moving, searching the darkness. That's when I saw it, just for a second, something pale, stepping behind a tree the moment my light passed over it. Tall and thin, moving with a strange fluidity. "Did you see that?" I called back to Helen. Before she could answer, the clicking started again. But now it was coming from a different location, off to the left. Then it started from the right side too, then behind us. We were surrounded by the sound, coming from multiple points around the cabin. Click, 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 overlapping and echoing through the trees. Helen pulled me back inside and we locked the door, both of us breathing hard. The clicking continued for hours, sometimes close, sometimes distant, always that same rhythm. We sat in the main room with all the lights on, waiting for dawn. When the sun came up, we packed and left. We didn't discuss it, didn't even finish our coffee. We just loaded the car and drove back to Knoxville. A week later, Constance called. She'd gotten our number from the sale records. "I saw you left early last weekend," she said carefully. "Everything all right with the cabin?" "We heard something," Helen told her. "In the woods, clicking sounds." Constance was quiet for a long time. "The Hendersons heard it too," she finally said. "Toward the end. They asked me about it once, but I didn't know what to tell them." "Have you heard it?" I asked. "Once," she said. "About 15 years ago. I was up near where your cabin is, walking the old logging trail. I heard the clicking and I left. Haven't been back to that part of the mountain since." "What do you think it is?" Helen asked. "I don't know," Constance said, "but I know the Hendersons took pictures. Did you find those?" We told her we had. "Then you saw it too," she said. "In the photos, did you notice how it got closer over time?" We had noticed. "Whatever it is," Constance said, "it's curious and patient. The Hendersons told me that toward the end, they'd see it during the day sometimes, just standing in the trees, watching the cabin. That's when they decided to sell." We thanked her for calling and hung up. Helen wanted to sell the cabin immediately. I convinced her to wait, to think about it. We'd put a lot of money into the place, and we couldn't afford to take a huge loss. Maybe we could rent it out, I suggested, or just avoid going back at night. But 3 weeks later, I got a text message from a number I didn't recognize. It was a photo taken from what looked like our back porch. The timestamp was from that morning. The photo showed the woods in daylight, and standing clearly visible in the tree line was a pale figure, tall and skeletal, with limbs that seemed too long for its body. Below the photo was a message: "We should talk." I called the number immediately. A man answered, young, maybe early 20s. "Who is this?" I demanded. "My name's Tyler Henderson," he said. "My parents used to own your cabin." "How did you get this photo?" "I have cameras set up on the property," he said. "Motion activated. I've been monitoring them since my parents sold the place. I wanted to see if it was still there." "Why didn't you tell us?" I asked. "Would you have believed me?" He had a point. "Look, I'm trying to understand what this thing is. My parents wouldn't talk about it, just packed up and sold as fast as they could. But I've been researching, talking to old-timers in the area. There are stories." "What kind of stories?" "About something that lives on Fletcher Mountain," Tyler said. "Something that's been there longer than the town, longer than the roads. The Cherokee had a name for it, but nobody remembers what it was. It watches people, follows them sometimes, but it doesn't usually do anything. It just watches." "Usually?" Helen asked. She'd been listening on speaker. Tyler hesitated. "There was a hiker who went missing in the 70s, and a hunting camp that got abandoned in the 50s. People said they heard the clicking before both incidents." We put the cabin on the market the next day, listed it cheap, as is, didn't mention anything about what we'd experienced. It sold in 2 weeks to a couple from Nashville who wanted a weekend retreat. I thought about warning them. I really did, but what would I say? That something lives in the woods and watches the cabin. But it makes clicking sounds and gets closer over time. They'd think I was insane. Tyler still sends me photos sometimes. The new owners are there most weekends, he tells me, and the figure in the photos is getting closer again. In the last one he sent, it was standing on the porch. I don't respond to his messages anymore. I don't want to know. Helen and I don't talk about Fletcher Mountain. We sold the cabin, cut our losses, and pretend it never happened. But sometimes late at night, I think I hear clicking sounds outside our house in Knoxville. Just faint, just barely there. I tell myself it's just the house settling, just pipes or branches or something normal, but I don't really believe that. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed these stories, hit the like button and subscribe for more. Let me know in the comments which story unsettled you most, and share this with your friends who love a good scare. Until next time, stay safe out there.